بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه الطيبين الطاهرين. I start by the name of Allah. I praise Him and thank Him for the countless blessings that He's granted us without being obligated to do so. And I humbly ask Allah Ta'ala to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his kind family, and his great companions. Thereafter, dear brothers and sisters, insha'Allah, in our lesson today, we are going to continue in the explanation of the chapter of transactions. So today we are going to look into some of the transactions which are prohibited. And so the author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, said, the following is a section explaining some of the unlawful transactions. It is unlawful, meaning it is haram, to sell what one has not yet received, meaning that it is not permissible for one to sell something that they bought before actually receiving that thing. For example, if Zayd buys some wheat from Amr, okay, Zayd is not allowed to sell that wheat until he actually receives it, until he actually has that wheat in his possession first. There are different ways of taking possession of something. So in order to understand this, we need to understand the different types of items that one can buy. So this depends on what it is exactly that he bought. If the item is not portable, it's not something that is moved, for instance, a house, then taking possession is done by emptying that house from the things that do not belong to the buyer. Okay? So the things that the buyer, the things that do not belong to the buyer must be emptied out of this house. And this is the way that one would take possession of such a place. And if the item is portable, if the thing that he was buying is something that can be moved, then taking possession of this thing is done by taking hold of the item with one's hands. If that's possible, to receive this item with their hands. This is the way that one would take possession of such an item. And if this was not possible, he wasn't able to receive this thing with his hands, for instance, like a car, then taking possession of such an item would be by moving that thing to a place that does not belong to the seller. Okay, so moving that car from the driveway of the seller to a place that does not belong to him anymore. And this would be the way that one would take possession of such an item. Next would be to sell meat in return for a living animal, whether or not the animals were permissible to eat, so whether or not they were halal. This is not allowed. Next would be to sell one debt for another debt, such as selling 1 kilogram of wheat, which would be given to the person at a later time, for 1 dinar, for instance. So this person bought 1 kilogram of wheat for 1 dinar, but he is yet to actually receive that wheat. He does not have that wheat within his possession. Instead, he is owed that 1 kilogram of wheat. And then this buyer, that person who is owed that 1 kilogram of wheat, he sold that debt. He sold what he was owed. He didn't sell the wheat itself. Instead, he sold the debt. And he sold it to another person for 1 dinar, which he would receive later on. So not something that he received at that time, rather something he would receive later on. And so that 1 dinar is also a debt. So here we see that this person is selling one debt for another. And this in Islam is forbidden. Also, to sell what one does not own or is not authorized to sell. So selling something that is not yours or that you do not own, or selling something that you do not have permission religiously to sell, this is not valid in Islam. Also, to sell what one did not see, whether both the buyer and the seller did not see the item, or just one of them did not actually see it. According to a saying of Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah Ta'ala raise his rank, if the item was described, then one would be allowed to sell it. Meaning, as long as that description is clear enough that once the buyer sees the item, he knows that this is the item that was described to him. And to buy something from a person that is not accountable. This is another type of transaction which is haram. It's unlawful. So it is not allowed for a person to buy something from somebody who is not accountable, or to sell to somebody who is not accountable, because this is not allowed in the religion. And what we mean by not accountable is that the buyer or the seller is insane, or he is not pubescent. So in this case, he would not be accountable. We are not talking about the non-Muslims here. And this is the rule in the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. May Allah Ta'ala raise his rank. However, in the madhab of Imam Ahmad, the child that is not pubescent, but he's reached the age of mental discrimination, is allowed to buy and sell things with the permission of their guardian. Okay, as long as that child has the permission of their guardian. As well, to sell what cannot be delivered, meaning it is unlawful to sell something that one is not actually able to give to the buyer, such as selling something that is lost, or selling something that was taken from the seller by force, and they are unable to actually get that thing back. So in these cases, a person is not actually able to make sure that the item is given to the buyer. And so this type of a transaction is haram. And as well, to sell what has no benefit, such as selling bread that has been burnt, or insects that have no religious benefit, such as beetles or scorpions. And according to some Shafi'i scholars, it is also invalid to sell anything without using the appropriate verbal statement from the buyer and the seller, and without fulfilling the conditions of those statements, like saying, I've sold you this item, or I've bought this item from you. So according to some Shafi'i scholars, it's a must that these types of statements take place within every transaction. But according to others, the mutual consent of the buyer and the seller is enough for them both to consent to selling this item for the said price. Meaning that the buyer would pay the known price and he would take that item without actually saying anything, without saying any of those statements that we had mentioned. This is valid according to some of the scholars. And they called this a sale of giving and taking. Yani al-bay'u bil-mu'atah. As well, to sell something that is not actually owned by the person. Like for instance, selling land that is unowned. Meaning to sell land that has no owner. Or land that no one has actually developed so that it would produce a benefit, like benefits of farming or a place to live, for instance. As well, to sell something that is not known, meaning it has not been specified. Like saying to a buyer, I now sell you one of these 2 shirts. But he does not specify which one of the shirts that he's actually selling. This kind of a sale in Islam is invalid. As well, to sell something that is considered filthy, such as blood or urine. Also, to sell any type of intoxicant, meaning any drink that causes intoxication, such as wine, because alcohol is considered filth, so it is not permissible to buy nor sell. And to sell unlawful articles such as the tumbur. The tumbur is a musical instrument which is similar to the lute. And the lute is an instrument which is similar to what we now know as the guitar, for instance. Other examples of unlawful items are the flute and the hand drum, which is shaped like an hourglass. As well, it is invalid to sell something that is lawful, that is halal, and is pure to somebody that you know is going to disobey Allah Ta'ala with this thing. Because it is not permissible to help others commit a sin. Like, for instance, selling grapes to someone that you know is going to make wine out of them. Or, for instance, selling a weapon to someone that you know is going to harm himself. He's going to kill himself, for instance, or he's going to harm other people with it. And to sell something as well that is defective without actually showing and clarifying those defects. And so if something defective is sold without the buyer knowing of the defects, then the buyer has the right to return that item as soon as they find out about those defects. And here, brothers and sisters, the author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, mentioned a very beneficial side note. He mentioned the side note about the inheritance before it is actually divided. So he said, it is invalid for the inheritors to divide the wealth of a deceased person or to sell it until their debts, including unpaid zakah, and their last will has been fulfilled. He said that it is invalid for the inheritors to divide the wealth of a deceased person or to sell anything from it until their debts, including unpaid zakah, as well as the will of that deceased person, has been fulfilled. As well, before dividing the inheritance, the inheritors, the people who are inheriting the wealth of that deceased person, they must pay the cost to hire somebody that will perform the Hajj and the Umrah on behalf of the deceased person from his wealth, okay, from the money that he's left behind. So that is if the deceased person was obligated to perform the Hajj and the Umrah, and they did not perform either of those things before they died. And so the wealth of the deceased person is like collateral which is held for that purpose. Because nothing can be sold or given away from something that is used as collateral before the actual debt that collateral secures has been repaid, okay? So that debt must be repaid first before that collateral can be released. So if that debt cannot be repaid, then the collateral would be sold for the debt so that this debt could be paid off. And this is the case with the inheritance. And now, returning to our original subject, it is also an unlawful transaction after the price of an item has been agreed upon for someone to change the decision of the buyer. For instance, by saying, I'll sell you something better than that for the same price. So they're trying to change the decision of the buyer after they have agreed upon a price with another seller by saying to that person, I'll sell you something better for the same price. Or by saying, I'll sell you the same thing for a lower price. Or for instance, to change the decision of the seller by saying, for instance, don't sell to this person. I'll buy the item from you for a higher price. So this is unlawful to do after the price has been agreed upon, meaning that both the buyer and the seller said that they accept that price for the item. And it is more sinful if this act is done after the transaction has been completed, but during the time when the buyer religiously has the choice to refund the sale. He religiously has the choice to return that item. However, if the seller was auctioning an item that he owned to see who would pay more for it, then it's not unlawful to change the decision of the seller before the transaction is completed. It's not unlawful to do those things that we mentioned in terms of changing the mind of the seller, meaning this is allowed. Moreover, it is not unlawful if someone changed the decision of the buyer for a reason other than selling to that buyer, or they changed the decision of the seller for a reason other than him buying the item from that seller. So here it's a different case. He does not want to purchase this item for himself, but rather for a different reason he wants this seller not to sell to that buyer specifically. Or for a different reason he wants that buyer not to purchase this item. This is a different case. Whereas if he was doing this because he himself wants to buy that item or he himself wants to sell that item, then this is invalid. Also, it is unlawful or haram to buy food such as bread or dates or similar staple foods at a time when the prices and food demand is high, in order to store that food and then sell it later on at a higher price, at an even higher price. Also, it is unlawful to make a higher bid for something in order to deceive, meaning in order to make others think that this item has a higher value than it actually does, so as to deceive them into buying it for a higher price. Also, it is unlawful or haram for either the buyer or the seller to cheat by hiding a defect or by deceiving the people in regards to volume or weight or length or count of an item, or to lie, like if the seller were to tell the buyer that this item has a market value of a certain price, while knowing that its market value is actually less than that. As well, it is unlawful to lend money to a buyer that might not have money to pay for the item, but with the condition that the item is sold at a higher price because of the loan. So this buyer is being loaned money so that he can purchase the item, but the condition of this loan is that he pays more for the actual item. This is haram. This is considered a type of riba. Okay, it is under the category of usurious gain, which we mentioned, riba al-qard. And it is also unlawful to lend money to someone that you've hired to do a service, like someone who would weave clothing, on the condition that the lender pays less than the going rate because of that loan. If this is put as a condition in the contract, then this would be considered riba. It would be considered usurious gain. And we seek refuge with Allah Ta'ala from such a thing. And it is also unlawful to lend money to a farmer, for instance, on the condition that the farmer sells the lender their harvest at a lower price. So the farmer would sell this lender, this person who gave him the loan, he would sell him their crops or their food, the wheat or whatever it is, at a lower price because of that loan. This is also considered a type of riba, a type of usurious gain. And many people's business dealings within this time, which is a time where many Muslims do not learn the religious rules and their fear of Allah has decreased. It's lower. Because of this, many of their business dealings are unlawful, haram, because they don't know actually how to perform these things within the religion. And so the one who seeks the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who sincerely wishes for that reward, and he seeks their safety in this life and the hereafter from falling into these types of sins, then this person must learn what they need to from the religious knowledge, like learning what is lawful and what is unlawful, before entering into such a transaction. They must learn these things from a trustworthy, knowledgeable person who is pious, God-fearing, who is sincere and cares greatly for their students' religious growth. So know, dear brothers and sisters, that seeking the lawful and avoiding the unlawful methods of getting sustenance like food and wealth, it's an obligation upon every Muslim. Now the following is a section which will explain the obligation of supporting one's dependents, the people who depend on him. Now the one who is wealthy is obligated to support his parents if they are poor, and his grandparents as well, even if they were able to earn their own living. He is also obligated to support his descendants, meaning his children and his grandchildren, whether males and females, who are poor and cannot work because they are young or because they have a disability which prevents them from earning a living. The husband is obligated also to support his wife by providing her with what she needs, like food and clothing and other basic needs, which the scholars have mentioned in detail. This is the case as long as the wife upholds the physical rights of her husband. The husband is also obligated to pay her dowry. In Arabic, we call this al-mahr. And if the marriage is ended for a reason that is not directly caused by the wife, the husband must give her a mut'ah, which is an amount of money paid by the husband to his ex-wife. For example, a husband divorced his wife because of her bad manners. And so, because the husband divorced his wife, he is the actual cause for the divorce. So he must give her this mut'ah. The wife, however, does not deserve this mut'ah if she was the cause for the end of the marriage. For example, if she committed apostasy and did not embrace Islam before that post-marital waiting period was over. Remember, we spoke about this period. Okay, so until now we've gotten to speak about the rights of the wife upon the husband. So from her rights upon her husband is that the husband would provide for her. He would take care of her in terms of her basic needs completely. And that he would pay her dowry. Now we'll speak about the rights of the husband upon the wife. And so the wife is obligated to obey her husband in allowing him the physical pleasures that are religiously permissible, like intercourse, for example, but not in a way that is against the religion. So she does not allow him to have intercourse with her while she is in the state of menstruation. And as well, she's not allowed to fast the recommended fast, the sunnah fast, without her husband's permission if he is in town, because this would prevent him from his rights upon her. As well, she is not allowed to leave her husband's home without his permission unless there is a religiously valid necessity to do so. And so with this, brothers and sisters, we've concluded our lesson for today. وَسُبْحَانَكَ اللَّهُمَّ وَبِحَمْدِكَ أَشْهَدُ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ أَسْتَغْفِرُكَ وَأَتُوبُ إِلَيْكَ